I stood in the corner of my own son's backyard, holding a carefully wrapped gift, watching as my entire family laughed and celebrated without so much as glancing in my direction. It was Marcus's 45th birthday, and I'd driven 3 hours to be here. But as I watched my daughter-in-law Jennifer clink champagne glasses with my other son David and his wife Amanda, as my grandchildren ran past me like I was invisible furniture, something inside me finally cracked. They didn't know it yet, but the envelope in my purse would change everything. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened next turned my family's world completely upside down, and I'm still processing it 6 months later. Let me back up and tell you how I got here. My name is Carol Henderson. I'm 72 years old, a widow of 8 years, and until that Saturday afternoon in April, I thought I had raised 2 good men. My husband Richard and I worked our entire lives. He was a mechanical engineer. I was a high school English teacher for 37 years. We saved, we sacrificed, and we put both our boys through college without a penny of debt. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Richard always said family came first, and I believed that with my whole heart. The morning of Marcus's birthday party started normally enough. I woke up at 5:30 in my small ranch house in Cedar Falls, the same house where I'd raised my boys. I made myself coffee, took my blood pressure medication, and started wrapping Marcus's gift. A vintage camera he'd been eyeing on eBay for months. I knew because he'd shown it to me during our last phone call 3 weeks prior. Or at least, I thought it was our last call. Turned out I'd been doing all the calling. I dressed carefully that morning. My powder blue cardigan, the one Richard bought me on our 40th anniversary trip to Maine. Pearl earrings. Comfortable flats for the drive. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought I looked presentable. Grandmotherly, kind. I had no idea I was dressing for my own public humiliation. The drive to Marcus's house in Oakmont Hills took exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes. I know because I checked the clock when I pulled into his subdivision. One of those new developments where every house looks like it cost at least $700,000. Marcus worked in pharmaceutical sales, and Jennifer was a marketing director for some tech startup. They'd bought the house 2 years ago, and I'd only been invited over twice. Cars lined both sides of the street when I arrived. The party was already in full swing, even though I'd arrived right at the start time on the invitation. Or rather, the text message invitation Jennifer had sent me at the last minute. Marcus's B-Day party Saturday 2 p.m. casual with an address. No RSVP requested. No hope you can make it, or would love to see you. Just the facts.
I parked 3 houses down and walked up the sidewalk carrying my gift and a homemade German chocolate cake, Marcus's favorite since he was 7 years old. I'd spent 4 hours baking it the night before, getting the coconut pecan frosting exactly right. My hands were shaking a little as I rang the doorbell, though I couldn't have told you why. Some instinct, maybe. Some part of me that already knew. Jennifer answered the door in designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She looked at me with surprise and something else. Annoyance, maybe? "Oh, Carol, you came?" She didn't move aside to let me in. "Of course I came, sweetheart. It's my son's birthday." I held up the cake. "I brought his favorite." "But—"
She glanced at the cake carrier with barely concealed disdain. "We have a dessert table already set up. It's all from that new French bakery downtown. But, sure, I guess we can find somewhere to put it." She finally stepped aside. "Everyone's out back." I followed her through the house, all gray and white modern furniture, nothing comfortable, nothing warm. through the kitchen where a catering staff was arranging appetizers on slate boards, out to the backyard where at least 50 people mingled on the expansive deck and perfectly manicured lawn. And that's where it started. That's where I became invisible. Marcus was standing by the grill with David and a group of men I didn't recognize, probably colleagues from work. I made my way over, smiling, ready to wish my son a happy birthday. "Marcus, honey." "Hey, let me tell you about this client I closed last week," Marcus said to David, completely talking over me. "Biggest commission of my career, $250,000 in one deal." I stood there, gift in hand, as they continued their conversation. After a full minute, I tried again. "Happy birthday, sweetheart." David glanced at me briefly, then looked away. "That's awesome, man. You should take Jennifer on that Italy trip she's been talking about." "Already booked it. 3 weeks in Tuscany." Marcus took a sip of his craft beer. "First class all the way." I waited. Surely he would turn to me, acknowledge me, something. But they just kept talking, and eventually I drifted away, my face burning with embarrassment. Maybe he didn't hear me, I thought. The music was pretty loud. I found my grandchildren next, Emma, who was 14, and Tyler, who was 12. They were with a group of teenagers by the pool house, all glued to their phones. "Emma, honey, hi. You look so grown up." She did. When had she gotten so tall? Emma glanced up, her thumbs still moving across her screen. "Oh, hey. How's school? Are you still doing volleyball?" "Yeah." She didn't elaborate. Her attention was already back on her phone, and the other teenagers were snickering at something on one of their screens. Tyler didn't even look up. I tried to join different conversation groups after that. Every single time, I was either ignored or given polite but dismissive responses before people turned away. Jennifer's friends were the worst. I overheard one of them whisper, "That's Marcus's mom," to another, who replied, "Oh God, the one who still thinks it's 1985. What did that even mean? I ended up sitting alone at the far end of the deck, watching my family celebrate. David's wife Amanda was there with their son Nathan, who was 16. I'd tried to talk to Amanda earlier, but she'd excused herself after 30 seconds, claiming she needed to help Jennifer with something. The lunch service started at 3. Beautiful catered food, grilled salmon, artisan salads, gourmet sides. I got a plate and found a seat at one of the rented tables. Within minutes, everyone else at the table had migrated away, leaving me alone again. I watched as Jennifer made a big show of cutting the elaborate bakery cake, a 3-tier chocolate ganache creation with gold leaf decoration. My German chocolate cake sat untouched on a corner of the dessert table. But here's the thing that broke me. Around 4 o'clock, they gathered everyone for toasts. Jennifer had set up a microphone and speaker system. One by one, people took turns sharing stories about Marcus, congratulating him, making everyone laugh. His colleagues, his friends from college, even his neighbor of 6 months. No one invited me to speak. No one even looked in my direction. Finally, as the toasts were winding down, I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I walked over and reached for the microphone. "I'd like to say something too." Jennifer smoothly intercepted me, physically stepping between me and the microphone. "Actually, Carol, we're running behind schedule. Maybe later." She turned to the crowd. "Okay, everyone, let's do presents now." I stood there, dismissed, as she guided Marcus to the gift table. My carefully wrapped vintage camera was somewhere in that pile. I watched as he opened designer bags from his friends, gift cards, expensive bottles of bourbon. When he got to mine, he tore off the paper quickly, barely glanced at the camera and said, "Oh, cool. Thanks, Mom." Then he moved on to the next gift without pausing. That camera had cost me $473, money I'd saved from my teacher's pension over 3 months. He'd spent 30 seconds on it. I stayed until 5:30, hoping something would change. It didn't. Finally, I gathered my cake carrier, my untouched cake, and slipped out the side gate. No one noticed me leave. I sat in my car for 10 minutes crying so hard I fogged up the windows. That's when I made the decision. That's when the nice, accommodating grandmother they'd all taken for granted decided to stop playing their game. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying every moment of the party, every dismissal, every turned back. This wasn't new, I realized. This had been building for years. The forgotten Mother's Days, the calls that went unreturned, the Christmas where they'd made plans without telling me and I'd found out from a photo on Facebook. My grandchildren who barely knew me. My sons who treated me like an obligation rather than their mother. When had I become invisible? When had I become so disposable? I pulled into my driveway at 8:45. The house was dark and empty, the way it had been every night since Richard died. I sat at my kitchen table, still in my powder blue cardigan, and I cried. Not gentle tears, big, ugly sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. All those years of sacrifice. All those hours Richard and I had worked to give them better lives. And this was how they treated me. But then, around midnight, something shifted. I dried my eyes. I made myself a cup of tea, and I went to my home office, the second bedroom where I kept all of Richard's old files. See, there were things my boys didn't know, things I'd kept private because Richard had asked me to, things that, in my grief and desire to be close to my children, I'd never mentioned. But sitting there at my desk, opening those file cabinets, I realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I'd just been acting like I was. The next morning was Sunday. I woke up with purpose for the first time in months. After breakfast, I called Eleanor Simmons, my best friend from my teaching days, now a successful real estate attorney. We'd had lunch once a month for the past 40 years, so when I asked her to meet me that day, instead of waiting for our scheduled lunch on Wednesday, she heard the urgency in my voice. We met at the Riverside Cafe at 10 o'clock. Eleanor took one look at my face and ordered us both strong coffee. "Tell me everything," she said. So I did. I told her about the party, about the years of being dismissed, about feeling invisible in my own family. Eleanor listened, her lawyer face firmly in place. When I finished, she sat back and studied me. "Carol, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Are you ready to do what needs to be done? Because if you start this, there's no going back. Your relationship with your sons will change fundamentally." "Eleanor, I don't have a relationship with my sons. I have a fantasy I keep telling myself. They've already checked out. I'm just finally accepting it." She nodded slowly. "Okay then. Tell me about Richard's estate." This was the part my sons didn't know. Richard had been smart with money, incredibly smart. On the surface, we'd looked like comfortable middle-class people living in a modest house. And we were. But Richard had also been an investor, a very successful one. Over 35 years, he'd built a portfolio that, at the time of his death, was worth just over $3.2 million. Nobody knew except me, Eleanor, and Richard's financial advisor, Martin Chen. When Richard died, he left everything to me with one important stipulation. In his will, he'd specified that upon my death, the estate would be divided equally between Marcus and David, but only if they'd maintained a genuine, loving relationship with me. Richard's exact words, which Eleanor had helped him draft: "I leave my sons my estate contingent upon them honoring and caring for their mother. Should they neglect her, treat her without dignity, or fail to maintain meaningful family bonds, My wife Carol shall have full authority to redirect these assets as she sees fit. It was unusual language for a will, but Richard had seen the signs even before he died. He'd noticed how the boys visited less, how they rushed phone calls, how they seemed to view us as outdated and embarrassing. He'd tried to talk to them about it, but they'd brushed him off, so he'd put this safety net in place. I'd never mentioned it to Marcus or David. After Richard died, I was so grief-stricken, so desperately lonely, that I couldn't bear the thought of them visiting out of obligation rather than love. I'd wanted them to come because they wanted to, not because of money. So I'd kept quiet, hoping things would get better. They hadn't gotten better. They'd gotten worse. "The will is airtight," Eleanor said, scrolling through the document on her tablet. "Richard made sure of that. And Carol, based on what you've told me about yesterday, and honestly about the past several years, you'd be well within your rights to invoke this clause." "I'm not sure yet," I said. "I need to be certain. I need to know this wasn't just one bad day, because if I do this, Eleanor, I'm essentially writing my sons out of any inheritance, not writing them out. They wrote themselves out. You'd just be enforcing the conditions their father set." She paused. "But I understand. You want to be sure. So let's gather evidence." That's when Eleanor suggested something that made my stomach turn, but that I knew I had to do. She suggested I test them, document their behavior, give them opportunities to step up and see if they took them. "Call them this week," Eleanor advised. "Tell them you need something. See how they respond. Document everything. Meanwhile, I'll review the will again, talk to Martin about the estate, and make sure everything is in order if you decide to move forward." So that's what I did. On Tuesday, I called Marcus. It took him 2 days to call me back, late on Thursday evening. His voice was impatient. "Hey, Mom, what's up? Jennifer and I are about to leave for dinner." "Hi, honey. I just wanted to thank you again for including me on Saturday. It was a lovely party." "Yeah, sure. Was there something you needed? We're kind of in a hurry." I took a breath. "Actually, yes. I have a doctor's appointment next Friday in the city at the hospital. It's just some tests my doctor wants to run, probably nothing. But I was hoping maybe you could drive me. I get nervous driving downtown and— Mom, next Friday? That's impossible. I have a huge presentation. Can't you take an Uber or something? It's for my heart, Marcus. The doctor wants to do a stress test and— Look, I'm sure it's fine. You're healthy as a horse. Listen, I really have to go. Talk to you later, okay?" He hung up before I could respond. I sat there holding my phone, feeling that now familiar ache in my chest. Then I carefully wrote down the date, time, and details of the conversation in a notebook. Eleanor had told me to document everything. I called David next. It went to voicemail. I left a message asking if he could help me move some furniture in my garage, Richard's old workbench that I wanted to donate. I explained that I couldn't lift it myself. 3 days passed, no call back. I texted both my sons asking if they wanted to come over for Sunday dinner. I told them I'd make pot roast, their favorite. Marcus: "Can't. Jennifer's parents are in town." David: "Busy, no apologies. No alternative suggestions, just dismissal." Meanwhile, Eleanor had been busy. She'd scheduled a meeting with Martin Chen, Richard's financial advisor, for the following Wednesday. She'd also quietly reached out to a private investigator she sometimes worked with on cases, a retired detective named Frank Morrison. "I'm not sure we need an investigator," I told her over the phone. "Trust me on this, Carol. If you're going to make a major decision about your estate, you need the full picture. Let Frank do some basic background work on Marcus and David, their finances, their lifestyle, anything public record. Knowledge is power." The meeting with Martin was enlightening. I'd been taking minimal withdrawals from the estate, living primarily on my teacher's pension and Social Security. I had no idea how much the portfolio had grown since Richard's death. Your current net worth, including the house and all investments, is approximately $4.1 million, Martin said, sliding a portfolio summary across his desk. Richard was brilliant at picking growth stocks, and the market has been very good to his picks. $4.1 million, and my sons treated me like I was worthless. Martin, I said carefully, if I wanted to change my will to redirect Richard's estate away from Marcus and David, what would that look like? Martin exchanged a glance with Eleanor. Given Richard's stipulations and your full authority under the will, you could do whatever you wanted. Charities, foundations, other family members. The estate is yours, Carol. Completely. I want to wait a bit longer, I said, but start drawing up options. Educational scholarships in Richard's name, maybe. He always valued education. That evening, Frank Morrison called me. He'd been digging into my sons' lives, and what he'd found made my blood run cold. Mrs. Henderson, I need to show you something. Can I come by tomorrow? Frank arrived at 10 the next morning with a folder full of documents. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd fed my boys breakfast before school for 18 years, and spread out his findings. Marcus and Jennifer are in serious financial trouble, he said. They're $730,000 in debt. The house is mortgaged to the hilt. They've got 3 car loans, credit card debt exceeding $90,000, and they're being sued by a contractor over unpaid renovations. I felt sick. How is that possible? Marcus makes good money. They spend better money. Country club memberships, private school for Emma and Tyler, expensive vacations, designer everything. They're living about $200,000 above their means annually. He slid another document toward me. David and Amanda are similar, though not quite as bad. They're about $300,000 in debt, mostly from building that addition on their house and buying a vacation property they rent out at a loss. So they need money, desperately. And Mrs. Henderson, there's more. Frank looked uncomfortable. I found some texts that David apparently sent to someone named Chad. Looks like a college friend. The texts were in a legal filing from David's business partner dispute last year, public record. He handed me printed screenshots. I read them, my hands starting to shake. David to Chad. Can't wait until Mom finally kicks it. Not being morbid, just being real. She's got to have at least $1 million squirreled away. Dad was smart with money. That'll clear my debts and then some. Chad. Dude, that's cold. David. Whatever. She's 72. It's not like she's using the money, just sitting on it while I'm drowning. There were more. Marcus to someone named Brett. My mom is so fucking clueless. Still living in that shitty little house while sitting on Dad's money. If she was smart, she'd divide it up now, but she's too sentimental. I read them twice, then 3 times. Eleanor, who'd arrived halfway through Frank's presentation, put her hand on my shoulder. Carol, I'm sorry. I know this is painful. Painful didn't begin to cover it. These were my babies, the boys I'd rocked to sleep and nursed through fevers and cheered at soccer games. And they were waiting for me to die so they could take their father's money. But beneath the pain, something else was growing. Something hard and cold and absolutely certain. I want to change my will, I said. Today. Eleanor nodded. I've already drafted several options. We spent 3 hours at my kitchen table that afternoon. Eleanor laid out possibilities. I could leave everything to charity. I could set up educational trusts for my grandchildren that Marcus and David couldn't touch. I could divide it among distant relatives. I could even leave it to my old school district for scholarships. In the end, I chose a combination. 1 million would go to establishing the Richard Henderson Scholarship Fund at my old high school, providing full rides to students pursuing engineering. Another 1 million would go to cancer research in Richard's name. Cancer had taken his father and 2 of his siblings. 500,000 would be divided into trust funds for Emma, Tyler, and Nathan, accessible only when they turned 25 for education and first homes. The house and remaining 1.6 million would go to Eleanor's nonprofit legal foundation, which provided free legal services to low-income families. Marcus and David would get exactly $10,000 each, enough to be clearly intentional, not enough to matter. "I need you to be certain," Eleanor said. "This is permanent, Carol." "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said. "But I'm not going to tell them yet. I want them to know why. I want them to understand exactly what they did." Frank had another suggestion. "Let me keep digging. I want to see if there's more. Sometimes when people are desperate for money, they do desperate things." He was right to keep looking. 2 weeks later, he called me with something explosive. "Mrs. Henderson, I need you to sit down for this one." Frank had discovered that Marcus and Jennifer had been trying to borrow money, using my house as collateral. They'd somehow obtained my property deed, probably from when I'd given them my important documents to keep safe in their fireproof safe 2 years ago, and had shopped it around to several lenders. The applications had been denied because they weren't legal owners, but the intent was clear. They'd been trying to take out loans against my house. My house. The house Richard and I had bought 43 years ago. "There's more," Frank said. "David convinced your neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, that you're becoming forgetful. He's been asking her to document any times you seem confused. I spoke with her myself. Lovely woman, very worried about you. She showed me some emails David sent her. The emails were chilling. David was building a case that I was mentally incompetent. He was trying to get enough evidence to petition for guardianship, which would give him control over my finances. My own son was trying to declare me incompetent so he could steal my money." I sat in my living room after Frank left, watching the sun set through my front window. I thought about Richard, about our life together, about the boys we'd raised with so much love. I thought about the woman I'd been at the party, invisible, dismissed, heartbroken, and I thought about the woman I was becoming. Eleanor came over that evening with a bottle of wine. We sat on my back porch, and I told her I was ready. I want to confront them, but I want to do it right. I want them to understand exactly what they've lost and why. "How do you want to do this?" Eleanor asked. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "I want to invite them to Sunday dinner. Here, at the house, both families. I'll tell them I have an important announcement about my estate. They'll think you're giving them their inheritance early." "Exactly." The invitation went out on Monday. "Important family meeting this Sunday at 1 p.m., lunch provided. Please don't miss this. It concerns your inheritance from your father." Both Marcus and David responded within an hour. David actually called me, the first time he'd called without prompting in 8 months. "Hey, Mom, got your message. We'll definitely be there Sunday. Do you need us to bring anything?" The sudden warmth in his voice was nauseating. "No, sweetheart, I've got everything covered." "I'm looking forward to seeing everyone." Marcus texted, "We'll be there." "Jennifer wants to know if this is about distributing Dad's estate." I responded, "All will be explained Sunday." See you then. The days leading up to Sunday were surreal. I cleaned my house thoroughly. I cooked, made Richard's favorite pot roast, homemade rolls, green beans with almonds, the works. I set my dining room table with my good china, the set Richard and I had gotten as a wedding present. I even bought fresh flowers for the centerpiece. Eleanor and Frank would be there too, though Marcus and David didn't know that yet. Eleanor would be there as my attorney. Frank would document everything. Sunday arrived bright and clear, a perfect May afternoon. I dressed carefully, a simple navy dress, Richard's favorite pearl necklace, low heels. I looked at myself in the mirror and hardly recognized the woman looking back. She looked strong, certain, maybe even a little dangerous. Marcus and Jennifer arrived first at 12:45, 15 minutes early. That told me everything. Jennifer was carrying a bottle of expensive wine and actually smiled at me. "Carol, you look lovely, and something smells amazing." "Thank you, dear. Come in, come in." David and Amanda arrived moments later with Nathan. Everyone was dressed nicely. Everyone was smiling. The grandchildren actually put down their phones long enough to hug me, something they hadn't done in years. We made small talk while I finished setting out lunch. Marcus asked about my garden. Jennifer complimented my dress. David helped me carry serving dishes to the table. It was a performance, and we all knew it, but they didn't know that I knew. At exactly 1 o'clock, the doorbell rang. "Oh, that must be Eleanor," I said casually. "I asked her to join us." And her associate Frank. I watched Marcus and David exchange glances. They knew Eleanor was my friend, but they didn't know she was also my attorney. Not yet. Eleanor entered with Frank, who was carrying a briefcase and a laptop. They greeted everyone professionally and took seats at the table. "Shall we eat first?" I suggested. "Then we can discuss the reason I asked you here." The meal was torture. Everyone kept up cheerful conversation, but the tension was palpable. I watched my sons trying to be charming, trying to be the attentive children they'd never actually been. Jennifer asked me 3 different times if I needed help with anything. Amanda told me how much Nathan had been asking to visit me, a lie so transparent I almost laughed. Finally, dessert was finished. I stood up and moved to the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming. I know you're wondering why I asked you here." I paused, looking at each face. "I want to talk about your father's estate, as I mentioned. Eleanor, would you join me?" Eleanor stood and opened her briefcase, pulling out several folders. Frank set up his laptop. "Before we discuss the estate," I said, my voice steady, "I want to talk about something else first. I want to talk about family, about respect, about how we treat the people we're supposed to love." Marcus shifted in his seat. "Mom, where is this going?" "I'm getting there, honey." I took a breath. 3 weeks ago, I drove 3 hours to your birthday party, Marcus. I brought you a gift I'd saved for months to buy. I baked your favorite cake, and I was completely ignored, dismissed, treated like I was invisible. "Mom, come on," Marcus said. "It was a party. There were a lot of people. Let me finish." My voice was firmer than I'd ever heard it. "That party wasn't an isolated incident. It was a perfect representation of how you've both treated me for years. The forgotten Mother's Days, the unreturned phone calls, the times I've needed help and you were too busy, the grandchildren who barely know me." "That's not fair," David protested. "We're busy. We have lives .. Quote, "Frank," I said, "show them the documents." Frank turned his laptop around. On the screen were the text messages between David and his friend Chad, the ones about waiting for me to die. David's face went white. "Where did you get those?" "Public record from your business partner lawsuit. You should be more careful what you write down." I turned to Marcus. "And you?" "Frank, the next one, please." Marcus's text to Brett appeared. His face turned red. "Jesus Christ, Mom, those were private." "Nothing is private when it becomes public record. But let's move on. Eleanor, tell them about the loan applications." Eleanor stood. "Marcus, Jennifer, you attempted to fraudulently use Carol's property deed to obtain loans from 3 different lenders. That's attempted fraud." Jennifer started crying immediately. Marcus stood up. We were desperate. You don't understand the pressure we're under. Sit down, I said, and my voice was cold enough that he did. And David, tell me about the emails to Mrs. Peterson. The ones where you're trying to build a case that I'm mentally incompetent. Amanda gasped. Nathan looked confused. David opened his mouth, then closed it. You were trying to get guardianship over me, I continued, to control my finances, to take your father's money before I was even dead. It's not like that, David stammered. We're just concerned about you, living alone. Stop lying. Each word was clear and separate. I know exactly what you were doing, both of you, and I'm going to tell you something your father knew before he died. Something I've kept from you because I wanted you to love me for me, not for money. I nodded to Eleanor. She pulled out copies of Richard's will and handed them to each son. Your father's estate is worth approximately $4.1 million. When he died, he left everything to me with specific instructions. Upon my death, the estate was to be divided equally between you, but only if you maintained a genuine, loving relationship with me, only if you treated me with dignity and respect. I watched their faces change as they read the relevant passages, watched comprehension dawn, followed quickly by horror. Mom, Marcus said carefully, Mom, we can fix this. We can do better. It's too late for that. I pulled out my own set of documents. 3 days ago, I signed a new will. Eleanor, explain what it says. Eleanor's voice was professional and cold. The Richard Henderson Scholarship Fund receives $1 million. Cancer Research receives $1 million. Trusts for Emma, Tyler, and Nathan receive a combined $500,000. Eleanor Simmons Legal Foundation receives the house and remaining assets. Marcus and David each received $10,000. The room exploded. Marcus was shouting. Jennifer was sobbing. David was white and silent, staring at the documents. Amanda was trying to shush Nathan, who looked terrified. You can't do this, Marcus yelled. That's our inheritance. Dad left it to us. No, I said calmly. Dad left it to me, contingent on you being decent human beings. You failed that condition spectacularly. The estate is mine, and I can do with it what I want, and I don't want you to have it. This is insane. Jennifer was on her feet now. You're punishing us for what? Not being attentive enough? For being busy with our own lives? I'm not punishing you. I'm responding to your actions. You tried to commit fraud using my property. You tried to have me declared incompetent. You wrote about how you couldn't wait for me to die, and most importantly, you treated me like I was worthless, like I was nothing. David finally found his voice. Mom, please, I'm sorry. I was stressed. I wasn't thinking. You were thinking plenty. You were thinking about my money, not about me, never about me. What about the grandchildren? Amanda asked desperately. They love you. You're cutting them out too? Emma, Tyler, and Nathan each get trusts they can access at 25. They'll be fine. Better than fine, actually, since they won't have the example of you waiting around for someone to die to solve your problems. I looked at all of them, at the anger, the devastation, the disbelief. I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. This meeting is over. Eleanor has copies of everything for your records. You have 30 days to contest the will if you want, though Eleanor assures me you have no legal grounds. I'd appreciate it if you all left now. Mom, please. Marcus tried one more time. Marcus, you made your choice a long time ago. You chose money over your mother. You chose convenience over connection. You chose cruelty over kindness. These are simply the consequences of those choices. They left slowly, in shock. Jennifer was still crying. David looked destroyed. The grandchildren were confused and scared. Amanda was furious. Only Marcus looked angry. actually angry, and that told me everything I needed to know about who he really was. When the door closed behind them, I sat down at my dining room table and started to shake. Eleanor and Frank sat on either side of me. "You did the right thing," Eleanor said quietly. "Then why do I feel so terrible?" "Because you're a good person. Because that was your family, and even when they don't deserve it, you still love them." She squeezed my hand. "But Carol, you stood up for yourself. You refused to be treated poorly. That takes courage." Frank added, "For what it's worth, I've seen a lot of families in my career. What they did to you was cruel. What you did today was justice." Over the next few days, my phone exploded. Texts from Marcus alternating between apologetic and furious. Voicemails from Jennifer begging me to reconsider. Emails from David trying to explain and justify and plead. I responded to none of them. Eleanor sent formal letters to both families explaining the finality of the decision and warning them against harassment. The letters worked. After a week, the messages stopped. I heard through mutual friends that Marcus and Jennifer put their house up for sale, that David took a second job, that family gatherings on Jennifer's side were tense and awkward because everyone knew what had happened. I felt nothing. Or rather, I felt relief. The weight of trying to earn their love, trying to be enough for people who would never think I was enough, was finally gone. That was 6 months ago. Now it's October, and I'm sitting on my back porch with my morning coffee, watching autumn leaves drift across my yard. My life looks completely different than it did this spring. I volunteer at the high school 3 days a week, helping students with their college essays. The Richard Henderson Scholarship Fund awarded its first 4 scholarships in September, full rides to deserving engineering students. I cried at the awards ceremony, thinking about how proud Richard would be. I've reconnected with old friends from my teaching days. We have a book club that meets twice a month, and I've started taking watercolor classes at the community center. Last month, I went on a river cruise through Germany with Eleanor and her husband. It was the first real vacation I'd taken since Richard died. The house feels different now, lighter. I've redecorated, got rid of furniture that held bad memories, kept the pieces Richard and I loved. My home office is now a studio where I paint. The garden is thriving because I actually have time to enjoy it. I haven't spoken to Marcus or David since that Sunday in May. Eleanor tells me they're both struggling financially but managing. The grandchildren are fine. Their trust funds ensure that. I sent each of them a letter on their birthdays, explaining that I love them, that none of this is their fault, and that when they're adults, if they want a relationship with me, my door is open. Not before then, though. I won't be used as leverage in their parents' drama. Sometimes I miss them. Of course I do. They're my children. But I don't miss feeling invisible. I don't miss being treated like I don't matter. I don't miss the constant hope followed by constant disappointment. Last week, Mrs. Peterson from next door invited me over for tea. She apologized profusely for the email she'd sent David, explaining that he'd convinced her he was worried about my safety. I forgave her. It wasn't her fault she was manipulated. "You seem different," she said. "Lighter somehow." "I feel different," I told her. "I feel like myself again." Here's what I've learned in these 6 months. Your worth is not determined by how others treat you. Your value doesn't decrease based on someone's inability to see it. And family, real family, is about love and respect, not obligation and blood. I gave my sons everything, my time, my energy, my savings, my love. They took it all and still wanted more. They wanted me to die quietly and leave them money they hadn't earned. When I refused to play that role, When I stood up for myself, I became the villain in their story. I'm okay with that, because in my story, I'm the hero. The woman who finally valued herself enough to walk away from people who didn't value her. The woman who took her late husband's legacy and turned it into something meaningful instead of letting it be squandered by people who saw it only as a solution to their self-created problems. Do I regret confronting them? Number. Do I regret the way my family ended? Yes and no. I regret that they made choices that led to this outcome, but I don't regret refusing to accept those choices as my burden to carry. If you're watching this and you're in a similar situation, whether with children, parents, siblings, or friends, I want you to hear this. You deserve respect. You deserve to be valued. And if the people in your life can't or won't give you those things, it's okay to step back. It's okay to protect yourself. It's okay to say, I deserve better than this. It might hurt. It will probably hurt. But living in that space between who you are and who others want you to be hurts more. Living invisible, dismissed, waiting for scraps of affection from people who should love you freely, that's a different kind of death. I'm 72 years old. If Richard's family history is any indication, I've got maybe 10 or 15 good years left. I'm going to spend them doing things I love, with people who love me back. I'm going to paint and travel and volunteer and laugh. I'm going to matter to myself, even if I don't matter to them. And you know what? That's enough. I'm enough. Some of you watching might think I was too harsh. That family should forgive and forget. That I should have given them another chance. Maybe you're right. Maybe in a different life, with different children, that would work. But they didn't want a mother. They wanted a bank account with a pulse. And I'm worth more than that. Thanks for listening to my story. It's not a happy ending in the traditional sense. I don't have my family back, and I probably never will. But it's the right ending. It's the ending where I finally chose myself. Don't forget to subscribe, and feel free to share your story in the comments. If you've ever felt invisible, dismissed, or taken for granted, I want you to know, I see you. Your voice matters. Your story matters. You matter. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is believe that.